Thanks for the invitation to present. I'm Frelih Larsen. I work at Ecologic Institute in Berlin, and I've worked on agro-environment, climate policy, and issues around climate and agriculture for the last almost 15 years. Recent years, very closely, intensively also on carbon farming. And I'll present some key messages on carbon farming potential practices and some of the key challenges that we've identified. Next, please. Yeah, so as Valeria pointed out, the Sustainable Cycles communication really focuses solely on the carbon component. So I will also focus on this narrow definition of carbon farming and specifically three overarching categories: peatland management, agroforestry, and management of soil carbon on mineral soils. Next slide, please. So based on available assessments that we have, managing peatlands has the highest potential per hectare of area, per unit area, and also a very significant total mitigation potential through maintenance of existing non-drained peatlands in natural state, through rewetting of drained peatlands, and then either reversing to nature conservation or productive use through polluted-culture. The estimated potential is around 51 to 54 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. And this is primarily through avoided emissions, but some research has recently also shown that there's additional sequestration potential once peatlands have been rewetted, but the figures on this are not yet quite robust. And the co-benefits from rewetting peatlands and managing peatlands are quite significant, both for farmers, but especially at societal level. Next, please. Agroforestry involves the creation, restoration, and management of woody features in the landscape. So this involves both traditional and new silvopastoral and silvoarable systems. But what's counted here too are hedges, hedgerows, and tree rows in the landscape. And the range of potential here is quite wide, from 8 to over 200 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. This is based on the Ag Forward project work. And this wide range reflects various options that are available, both in terms of the type of the system, the end use from the timber in the system, and of course, how widely agroforestry would be adopted. Currently, it only covers about 9% of total agricultural land area in the EU. And this is primarily about additional carbon sequestration, but there might also be some emission reduction potential, especially around more efficient nitrogen use in the arable grassland component. And again, agroforestry has really high co-benefits, both for farmers and for society at large. Next, please. Maintaining and enhancing soil organic carbon on mineral soils is the category that tends to get the most attention. Often in recent years, there's been a lot of talk around regenerative agriculture on arable and grasslands, and this involves quite a range of practices, but the most significant ones are improved cropping practices and cover cropping, improved crop rotation through addition of legumes, diversity of crops, also things like deep rooting crops, improved grassland management and maintenance of grassland, as well as conversion of grassland, of arable to grassland. And it's both about maintaining current stocks. It's really important to point out that with status quo, especially on arable land, many soils in the EU would continue to lose carbon. So even just stopping that has an important climate impact, but there's of course also additional sequestration and multiple benefits. Perhaps most immediate benefits to farmers in terms of productivity, stability of yield, improved water retention, etc. And as somebody pointed out about minimum soil disturbance being missing, these are just really illustrative categories. Under the maintain and maintaining and enhancing SOC, there's a really wide range of practices that come together to deliver the aggregate mitigation potential. I look forward to hearing more, your views of which ones should be added. As you see, there's quite considerable uncertainty and range in the estimates, especially for agroforestry and for the mineral soils. And the potential, this uncertainty and the diversity of potential is, due to very different biophysical conditions, due to different farm types, also due to different current land use and current status quo practices. It also reflects importance of local context. And important to note is also that these estimates, aggregate estimates, are often technical potentials that don't adequately consider barriers to uptake. For peatland rewetting, the potential estimates have much less certainty. There's much more certainty, much less uncertainty. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'd like to point to some of the challenges associated with carbon farming. So in relation to the uncertainties around mitigation potential, the central question here really is what kind of systems and practices do we focus on, where to get the highest impact? We have estimates at quite high level. How do we get to systems that deliver the best impact at more granular level? I think that's an important research question, still open. Another challenge is around non-permanence and risk of reversal and how this can be best managed. There's a lot of debate around that. And although the emphasis in sustainable cycles communication is on carbon, it's really important that it's not just the carbon that matters, it's the total mitigation, total climate impact. We need to also account for nitrogen oxide emissions associated with maintaining and increasing carbon stocks and account for the total impact that these practices really have. Peatland rewetting is also associated with methane emissions, and after rewetting, these can be managed, but they need to be managed. And there's also leakage, potential decrease in production, and how to best manage that also needs to be, I think, worked out a bit more. There's, in relation to using compost and manure, this makes a lot of sense as part of overall move towards improved circularity, but essentially this results in transfer of carbon within the system without a net increase in carbon stocks. So the additionality requirement is not met. And this, I think, poses a challenge for certification schemes. There's also some conflict in terms of overall climate impact between mitigation practices, which are not included in the Commission's definition of carbon farming, such as nitrification inhibitors and low emission slurry application, which can negatively impact on soil health and their ability to maintain and sequester stocks. So what's the actual aggregate impact of applying these different practices is, again, a pretty substantial open question that needs to be addressed and managed. And then there's also risks associated with biochar, with applying municipal compost, which both are allowed under certain certification schemes as eligible activities. And in relation to agroforestry, that agroforestry shouldn't really be applied on peatlands due to the emissions during the planting and establishment phase. And finally, monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon farming practices. This is still very difficult and costly. Next slide, please. So some concluding thoughts. There is overall a very significant mitigation potential, but many uncertainties around how much exactly as soon as we move to more granular level. So to target policy better, I think we really need improved assessments of what works best where, and especially also how synergies with other environmental goals can be promoted. MRV needs to focus on total climate impact, not just the CO2 component of carbon farming practices, because otherwise we may be overestimating the impacts and we may actually have some perverse effects. And building resilience in the system will also increase rethink the permanence of these carbon stocks. So in relation to agroforestry, really thinking of what kind of things will increase the resilience of the agroforestry system. And we need safeguards to deal with the risks of some of the carbon farming practices, as well as more broadly mitigation practices in agriculture. And carbon farming needs to be seen as part of a broader transition to sustainable agri-food systems. So what Valeria already mentions is that there is the potential to deliver win-win solutions, but this isn't a guarantee. So there needs to be work done on that to ensure the win-wins. Next slide, please. So this was kind of a sprint through some of the key messages. And if you're interested in reading up a bit more, we have some publications and also some projects that you might find interesting. And on that note, I'd like to thank you again for your attention.